Is there some eager lad attempting to apply for a job? Maybe a job abroad? Or maybe a job as part of some sort of international confederation? I see. Did you use me as a reference? Is that why you have this accent? Huh? Hmm? You should never have sent it. What should you not have sent? See, here's the thing. If you wanted to try to pretend like it was a loan, well, it's been over 3 years. And we're coming up on 4. So if I read this, will I have to maintain the accent throughout? Why would it have this accent? Did you show it to somebody with an accent like that? Because as far as I know, nobody else has seen this except for one person. Maybe two. Actually, two. Right? And you know what that means? If the other person actually did see it, then that means there's 2 witnesses. Additional report on role of banking bailout enterprise corruption, composed May of 2017. This suit aims to show how pervasive enterprise corruption has infiltrated and assumed control of the U.S. health and human services system via the financial industry. The criminal enterprise at the heart of the syndicate includes many current and former members of the U.S. Congress and other governmental agencies, as well as banking, insurance, and financial services executives and board members. Their efforts have been effectuated through legislation aimed at creating an enduring situation of unlawful debt for citizens of the United States and others. This unlawful debt is used to engage U.S. citizens and others in behavioral economics experiments designed to create human transactional vehicles to facilitate the transfer to a fully digitalized economy and access abstract labor and other abstract assets from U.S. citizens and others. Does this sound familiar? Several pieces of legislation prior to 2007 paved the way for this process of obligating U.S. citizens to unlawful debts for the purposes of collecting material and abstract assets for assignment to various financial institutions. These institutions were engaged through the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act of 2008, and complementary pieces of legislation reveal the structure of the criminal enterprise. The later introduction and passage of the Affordable Care Act facilitated the proliferation of this criminal enterprise and enabled it to entice U.S. citizens and others into large-scale securities fraud, wire fraud, and acts which legally constitute peonage. As the criminal enterprise spread, it grew to engage in acts of labor and sex trafficking, as well as arms and drug trafficking, and even includes trafficking in people's genetic materials. With the concurrent relinquishment of procedural safeguards for people ensnared in this syndicate, it served to spread corruption throughout multiple levels of society, and today represents a virtual epidemic of political and financial corruption in the United States. It is additionally seeking to expand its structure through contrived legislative changes. Despite appearances of factional differences, it is a consistent criminal enterprise with an ascertainable explicit and implicit structure. The modus operandus of this criminal enterprise is to use the abstract labor of U.S. citizens to test behavioral economics modalities in order to modify behavior with the aim of predicting and commanding consumption patterns. At more advanced levels, genetic testing, mental health assessments, and treatments, including treatments using psychotropic medications or controlled substances, and alternative resource acquisition networks were instituted to program individuals into predetermined economic roles. Demographic and other personal data was used to develop targeted marketing that effectively employed the behavioral economics project to effectuate predictable consumption and spending patterns. By limiting access to financial resources, social programs were given leeway to develop experimental models that literally used the movements of people in the health and human services programs to wire monies for accounts to which they had been assigned. These experiments were performed on people without their conscious knowledge and without their conscious consent. In the course of the experimentation, people were literally used to launder money for any number of operations and industries. People were told that they were accessing derivatives of the actual process in the form of resources that they needed for their survival. a great deal of the 2008 financial crisis was attributed to, quote, excessive exposure of banks' investment banking arms to derivatives and securities tied to U.S. home prices, end quote. But the collapse of the real estate market and the experience with derivatives based on fixed assets merely set the stage for experimenting with new derivative processes using mobile and or abstract assets. Healthcare, especially mental health care, provided an excellent forum for this development. I'm going to stop that there. I wrote this in May of 2017 after I had already filed grievances and in the course of an ongoing effort at reporting and investigation. But I'm going to say something now that one of the things that has been proven just this year is that there has been a process concurrent to this involving abuse of the judicial branch of government. And in some ways, what this actually discusses is a very moderate description of how comprehensive this criminal conspiracy is. Not only that, but it's primarily, I understand, allowed to persist because of a co-conspiracy along with the alleged defense sector. And I say alleged defense sector because creating weapons and modalities through which to use processes of weaponization and that which would otherwise be considered a national security concern, including one that could be addressed within the kind of accountability that a military and a standing military structure should provide, is actually a form of incentivization for people to try to engage in a form of risk leveraging that should not be acceptable. And so far as there is a modus, the actual functionality of the methodology through which the specific banking and financial institutions of concern from the United States can be tracked actually goes all the way back to not only the 80s in a specific manner, but I've found information that takes us all the way back to the 50s. And the processes, as I understand, are now in a situation of attempting a recapitulation. What happened was this was sat on. This was sat on long enough for somebody to avail themselves of personal financial gain and allow others in their network to be availed of personal financial gain, while they also co-conspired to cover up other evidence of crimes that prove this premise and proliferate those crimes and attempt to retaliate against people that could be witnesses, that could provide testimony, that would necessarily have to provide actual material evidence, and by the way, people that would be involved in prosecuting it. And now we're at a situation where I understand they want to try to reverse engineer what they've already created and allow for other people to get their benchmarks set up and to get their contracts set up. They haven't had any intention since I submitted this to the person I did, which I did in a particular manner. Why? Because in order for a prosecution at this level to be successful, somebody at the level he is at or alleged to be at would have had to have taken congressional action. That's not what he did. He had a really nice campaign season. And a whole bunch of other people had really nice campaign seasons correlative with him. But there was no actual traction on this. On the contrary, what was set up were processes whereby domestic entities were intentionally sabotaged while foreign allies were slandered in order to prevent against an actual method by which we could cooperate to move forward on this. And now what we've seen is after they force collectivized the abstract but also literal material property of the people of the United States, up to and including our actual DNA, and issued a bunch of stock, government stock with the goods of the United States, and then allowed that to get transferred to the foreign markets. This is showing up as very high level security and economic paradigms in other countries, including countries alleged to be enemies of the United States. Why? Because that's what this was about. Why would you spend years characterizing other countries as a nation as being enemies of the state or worthy of sanctions for their, among other things, acts of money laundering, and they're aiding and abetting of acts of destabilization within this country, and then allow for your friends in the banking industry to aid and abet war crimes against your own people, make stock, and all of these other financial deals to convert 10-year deals that came due around the same time, just so happens that we have to be dealing with this so-called health pandemic, and then allow for all of this to be set up as a hedging strategy being effectuated by national actors in the very countries alleged to be enemies of the state. It's that precise. Whoever it was that thought that they were authorized to steal this and turn it into an economic portfolio that they could sit on long enough to get their own leverage and then sell off abroad as part of some what? Debt swap? See, this was supposed to be a criminal prosecution. So when you sit on it, and when you don't move forward on it as a criminal prosecution, it defaults, doesn't it? And did you want to swap that out? What if they decide to actually fucking prosecute? Because I was prosecuting right here, and you're the ones that defaulted. And it accrues every day.